What are the origins of tying knots to remember things? And why are we supposed to be so happy right now? This is Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and you're listening to Jews Did It First. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Sorry, it's been a while since the last podcast. It's been a crazy couple of months. My wife's been very ill, and it's been really rough getting into a rhythm here. But thank God things are doing better now, and I hope to be a little more consistent. Please, whatever you're listening on, whether it's YouTube or iTunes, please like, share, comment, give a good rating, all that sort of stuff. It really helps out. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please go to jewisoswego.org/Jews Did It First. Really appreciate that. And now let's get on with it. So, despite the title, you might have gotten a little marriage reference there, but it's not. Don't worry. I'm not suggesting Jews did marriage first, but this is actually about tying knots. The first sort of unambiguous knot tying seems to be in the first millennia of the Common Era, and you had this in the Incan societies, the Peruvian societies, and it seems to be quite old in ancient cultures. However, these were mostly to symbolize something, whether it be numbers, ideas, whatever. They're really still not 100% sure exactly what it refers to, what it means, although they have pretty good ideas. But I really wanted to focus on the concept of tying a knot to remember something. Okay? Tying a knot to remember something is, it's a common practice. We've seen it, you tie a knot on your finger or something like this to remind you to do something. And that practice seems to be relatively recent. However, as we're going to see, Jews did it first. How so? Well, I'm going to mention a couple of sources here, three sources in particular, which really bring this out in Jewish thought. We'll go backwards in time, I guess. The first mention of this going backwards in time, so I guess the most current one would be, that's old, would be in the Zohar. Actually, I'm not really sure how these all fall out. So in the Zohar, it mentions a rabbi, and this is Rabbi, what's his name? Amrle Yoim Achada, who is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says in the Zohar, this is found on page 190, side A, and he says over there that he was going someplace, and he says he needed to remember something. What was it over here? So he heard something, and he didn't want to forget it. So what did he do? V'natir nolei tzorir bekanfa delevushoy delo yis ade minoy la'almin. Which means that he tied a rock on his, a pebble, onto his garment, so that these things would not be forgotten by him. He didn't want to forget, so he made a knot. He tied the thing on his garment, so that way he would remember them. Now the Zohar, we're talking around the turn of the Common Era. Maybe this could be first century, the first century before the Common Era, first century after the Common Era, somewhere around that time. And that's pretty old. Pretty old. But wait, it gets better. We then have a biblical reference, and this is what's commonly seen as, where did this start? And that is the biblical reference in Numbers. In Numbers 15, we have the commandment to wear the tzitzit, the fringes that you see many Orthodox Jews wearing. It's like almost like a little poncho that we wear under our shirts. In some groups, they wear them on the outside. Some groups will tuck them in. Some groups leave them hanging out. And if you go to New York, you see lots of people with the white fringes hanging out of their shirts. And there it is a bunch of knots. There's actually 5 knots on each corner. And the reference there that God says in the Bible in Numbers 15 is that we should wear these knots. I'll look it up for you. Sorry, I didn't have the page open on this one. It says you should tie them, make for yourself fringes, the tzitzit, on the corners of your garments for your generations, and you'll put these tzitzis on the corners, psil techelis, which is like the blue string, and they will be for you tzitzit, fringes. Ureisa moisa, you will look at them. Uzachartem, you will remember. As kol mitzvahs Hashem, all of the mitzvahs of God, all the commandments of God. Va'asisam, and you'll do them. So the whole point is to remember the commandments of God. Now, how does it do that? So interestingly enough, the word tzitzit, every letter has a numerical value in Hebrew. So the word tzitzit equals 600. And if you add together the 8 strings and 5 knots in every corner, 600 plus 8 plus 5 is 613. And this represents the 613 commandments. So there we have a biblical reference to the tying of knots for remembering, which is quite old. Numbers 15, we're talking already the first millennia, we're talking about 1300 BCE already, so that's quite long ago. And just in case you think that's not old enough, we have a reference even older than that, somewhat of a biblical reference. It's actually in the Midrash, which is extra-biblical oral tradition of the Jewish people, but it's referencing a story that happens even before Numbers 15, way back in Genesis. If you go back to Genesis, in Parshas Miketz, it talks about Joseph, and he's in prison, and this is from, where is this? I'm not sure. 30? Verse 19, I think? Chapter 30? What's XL? No, 40. Does that make sense? Chapter 40? L is 50, X in front, so I guess that's 40. Yeah. So, chapter 40, verse 19. And it says over there, and it came to pass on the 3rd day, which Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a feast, and he restored the chief butler into his butlership, but he hanged the chief baker and Joseph, as Joseph had interpreted to them. So you remember, these 2 guys, the butler and the cupbearer of Pharaoh, go into prison with Joseph, and they have these dreams. And the butler's dream is that the cupbearer, or the baker and the butler, which is like the cupbearer, sorry, I apologize. And the baker's dream is pretty bad. These loaves of bread get eaten by the vultures, and he says, so in 3 days you're going to be hanged. And the butler, the cupbearer, he has this dream about crushing grapes, and he gives the cup to Pharaoh and so on. And so he says, in 3 days you're going to be restored to your position. And he asks the butler, please remember me, that I'm in prison, that I helped you out. When you get out, please go and help me out, and remind Pharaoh that I'm here and help me get out. That's the story there. So how does the butler remember this? So this is now, when is this? This is, I'm not sure. This is about 500 years before that, before the Numbers thing. Okay? So about 500 years prior to the Numbers reference is this story. And he says, maybe so less than 500 years, 300 years. And he says to him, the Midrash says, this is in Midrash Rabbah for Bereshis Rabbah, 88. Is this 88? Yeah. 88, 7. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph. That's verse 23. And the Midrash comments, he kept on making resolutions the whole of that day, but an angel would come and upset them. He kept making knots, but an angel would come and untie them. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, you have forgotten him, but I have not forgotten him. And the whole point there was that he was, another interpretation says, the chief butler forgot you, but I will not forget you. And the whole point is that God is supposed to be taking him out, not the butler. But here we see, what is the butler doing? As the Medrash relates in the Bible, tying knots in order to remember Joseph. So this is probably the oldest idea of tying knots, and we see it in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, in reference to the character of Joseph. And so we can see clearly that Jews did it first. Now, for a short Dvar Torah, a brief Torah thought on this season. In case you're not aware, we're now in the Hebrew month of Adar. We've been there for a couple of weeks now, and because it's a leap year, which means we have 13 months instead of 12 months, there's actually 2 months of Adar. Now, what is special about Adar? Adar has the month of Purim, which is the very happy holiday. It is the happiest holiday of the year, perhaps, and it's a very amazing holiday. In fact, Purim, you might notice, it sounds a lot like Yom HaKippurim. Yom Kippur is called Yom HaKippurim, which could be translated as the day that is like Purim. So Purim's even higher than Yom Kippur. That's neither here nor there. Maybe I'll talk about that in about a month when we get to Purim itself. But since we have 2 Adars, we're only halfway through the first Adar, which means there is extra happiness. And it's such a happy month because of the month of Purim, and it affects the entire month. In fact, the Mishnah tells us that Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim Basimcha. When you enter the month of Adar, you should increase in joy. And so now that we have 2 months of Adar, we're constantly increasing in joy for 2 whole months. I heard a cute little story that, when it says increase in joy, it also says in the Talmud, Ein Simcha Ela B'Yayin, there is no joy greater than wine. So therefore, to increase in joy means the first day of Adar, you say 1 l'chaim. The second day of Adar, you say 2 l'chaims, and so on and so forth. So until I guess we'll get to 60 l'chaims. I'm not sure if that's so kosher, but it's just it's a little joke. Don't get too worried. L'chaim. And so, the reason that it's such a special time, like I said, because of Purim, and it says that you should, even if you have any kind of court case or other kind of dispute against non-Jews, you should actually get it handled during this time. And so I actually have a personal story that happened to us when many years ago we were in a house and we were getting evicted because the guy who purchased the house from our previous landlord wanted to keep it for himself, fix it up and sell it, not sell it, but rent it out to students so you can make more money that way than renting it out to a family. Of course, you have to spend a lot more in fixing it up, but whatever. In any event, he wanted us out. He did everything incorrectly when it came to the getting rid of us. There's certain procedure you have to follow when it comes to evicting tenants. You have to send them written notice and so on. Well, this guy just waited until the lease was up, and on the very last day calls me up and says, "Hey, aren't you leaving?" No. Don't you notice we didn't have any thing going on? So I just assumed the lease would renew, because that's what had happened to us previously with another house. So he gets very upset. He ends up taking us to court. Somehow he pulled some strings, and he takes us to court within a few days. And my attorney tells me that this really should be a few weeks. You're supposed to give the person time to make arrangements to be able to go to court. And she said, "I will postpone it if you want me to." I look at the calendar. When are we going to court? Happens to be the last day of Adar. It was still within the month of Adar. And so I told her, "No, we're going to court, and I'm telling you, you're going to see miracles." She didn't believe me. But, as we say in the Gemara, that's exactly what happened. We get to the court. The judge looks at the case. He says, "Well, did you send him a written notice?" The guy says, "No." And he says, "Did he pay his rent so far?" for this coming month? And the guy says, yes. And so the judge says, well, in that case, he's still able to be there. Case dismissed. He throws the whole thing out. So the whole thing probably lasted less than a half an hour. It was over and done. And we were victorious because I realized that because it was the month of Adar, there was absolutely no way anything bad was going to happen. And it also, a good thing that happens besides the month of Purim, and this is in the Purim story in the Midrash, is that it is the birthday of Moses, of Moshe Rabbeinu, during the month of Adar. The 7th of Adar is Moses' birthday. It also happens to be his Yortzeit, the anniversary of his passing. So these are very happy times indeed. The month of Adar, the month of Adar contains my wedding anniversary. It contains my wife's birthday, the date of her conversion. And so it's a very, very happy time for us personally as well. And like I said, this whole miracle story that happened to us with getting evicted. Don't worry, the end of the story is he did eventually evict us through the proper channels, and we made sure that it coincided with purchasing the house that we live in now. So as soon as the eviction took place, we had our house. So Baruch Hashem, thank God everything worked out, and I want to wish you happiness and joy during this time. It's doubled joy because it's a leap year. There's a double Adar, 60 full days, and there's a concept in Jewish law of batul b'shishim, that something is nullified within 60. For instance, if a drop of milk falls into a meat soup, even though normally milk and meat is kosher, even though normally milk and meat is not kosher, the fact that it's 60 times the amount of milk that dropped in it nullifies the milk, and the whole thing becomes kosher, or remains kosher. So likewise, with 60 days of joy for 2 months of Adar, any negativity, anything bad or deleterious is completely nullified within the joy of Adar. So I wish you all a happy and joyous Adar, a good Chodesh, a good month, and a good Yor, and a Shabbat Shalom.